Australia has banned young people under the age of 16 from using social media. Or more probably, it has banned social media companies from allowing under 16-year-olds to have accounts on their websites. And I have thoughts. This, of course, follows the implementation of the UK's Online Safety Act earlier this year, which also was the subject of impassioned thoughts online. And what continues to fascinate me about this topic, the sort of regulation of social media and broader internet use, particularly for young people, but I guess more broadly as well, is not only quite how impassioned people get about this particular topic, but also some of the kind of strange, contrarian arguments that it leads people to make. I am someone who cares deeply about this topic, right? I'm someone that spends a lot of time thinking, writing, reading about big social media platforms and how they operate within our world, how we relate to them. I'm also someone who plies my trade on the internet, right? The economics of what I do is entirely reliant on people being able to watch videos, and the easier it is for people to do that, the better for me. And yeah, I think I'm someone who's very persuadable on this topic in sort of both directions. I very much see the negatives of social media in our world. I think that is something that a lot of people can agree on. I also see a lot of the difficulties of trying to implement any real regulation that feels like it would do something useful and not have too many negative consequences. And so I find myself often a onlooker to some of these conversations. And I want to try and break down today sort of why I think people sometimes end up talking across one another when it comes to this topic, and try and bring a little bit of sense to it, maybe. But with that comes the caveat that I'm kind of interested to know what you guys think down in the comments, and that this is very much a video in which I'm kind of like thinking out loud. And I think the first place that we have to start is that if you start to watch any kind of stuff about whether it's Australia's social media ban last week, or whether it is the Online Safety Act, whether it is other kind of moves by governments to regulate or shape who can use certain social media platforms, it can often feel, being online, that everyone is wildly against them. It's relatively easy to go on TikTok, go on YouTube, and find people who are either dead set against this or absolutely certain that it won't work and therefore that it should not be implemented. Not saying that they're entirely wrong or the concerns aren't absolutely there. What's interesting is that if you look at polling of people generally in the world, this stuff is really popular. So YouGov undertook some polling in Australia last month. I forget which month it is. In fact, this is a couple of weeks ago. And in the lead up to the ban coming into effect, 77% support among Australians. This also includes election polling as well. So my assumption here, and this isn't an assumption, is that this is polling of people who are over 18, which would maybe make sense that people who aren't being affected by it are a little bit more okay with it existing. Although maybe it's not super duper interesting to learn that people under the age of 16 might be against it. But engaging with this topic online, it can often feel like this is either something that people are against, or even that it is really controversial. And that kind of just isn't the case, right? And the same is true in the UK. So YouGov also did some polling 29th, so this is a couple of weeks ago, of people in the UK, asking them, would you support or oppose banning children under the age of 16 from having social media accounts? And 36% strongly support, 36% somewhat support. So that is, getting on for those same figures. That's 72%, where in Australia it's 77%, so slightly lower, but not a huge amount. Also interesting that Australia data very much has to be across parties. So politicians from both the Labour Party and the coalition voted for this to go through. And with that kind of support amongst adults in Australia, that has to be support sort of across the political aisle. Some people question how far to the left the Australian Labour Party are. That's maybe a conversation for a different day. And I was trying to work out, why is it that it feels like there are two camps which are so disconnected on this topic, right? We have a somewhat smaller camp, which you particularly see expressing their thoughts on it online, who are like dead against it. It's not going to work. It shouldn't exist in the first place. It's bad, or the sort of knock-on effects are going to be worse than the ban itself. And then on the other hand, we have the vast majority of people who are in support of it and maybe just don't see any of those potential negative consequences, which we'll get onto and are very much there. I don't want it to come across that this video is like entirely jubilantly in favor of the topic. As I say, this is very much me kind of trying to weigh up some thoughts and think aloud a little bit on a topic which I don't feel like I have all of the answers to. And I ended up finding myself coming back to an article by Mark Prensky from the early 2000s called Digital Natives, Digital Immigrants. I've pulled it up because this is one of those articles, one of those kind of conceptual things, which for a time I feel like was real pop sociology stuff, the kind of thing that just got quoted all the time. I don't know if it's a little bit old now, so some people might not be aware of it. This was the broad idea that some people in society at least were, and maybe still are, digital natives, so people who are somewhat younger. I would mostly count myself as this, certainly anyone younger than me, who are people who have grown up just existing in a world with technology of the kind that we are used to today, existing in a world of the internet in such a way that if we need to solve a problem, we will instinctively turn to a phone, to a computer to solve that problem, right? Where shopping, the instinct might be to go online rather than for that to kind of be a choice. Do I need to get somewhere? Whack out the phone straight away. Got thoughts to send someone? Whack out WhatsApp, right? And sort of Mark Prensky kind of contrasts that with digital immigrants, who for him are people who have kind of come to technology and maybe they use it a lot, right? Most people throughout society now, whatever age you are, use computers, use phones, but that maybe the experience of having grown up in a world without that and then adapting to that means that often technological solutions are a choice rather than a go-to. And I think this barrier has weakened a little bit now. I think my mum these days is more often likely to use maps on her phone than even 5 years ago, where she might have had to get somewhere and using her phone would be like a secondary option or something she would do and sort of almost feel a bit uncomfortable doing because it's not the way she's used to driving somewhere, right? And I think this is a really interesting model for trying to understand the Online Safety Act and the social media ban for under 16s in Australia, because I think there are almost two completely different mental models that people are approaching this topic with. And so I want you to imagine, because I'm going to assume that if you're watching this, you are probably someone who is very much in that digital native camp, right? And you possibly, when I threw up some of this polling, were like, oh, I don't understand how so many people can be so deeply supportive of bringing government safeguards onto the internet. And I think that's because so many of us have grown up in a world where having different rules for the internet to real life feels really normal, in a way that if you try and put yourself in the mental model of someone who is a digital immigrant, suddenly it's not some of the ways in which we think of almost like the basic rights of the internet suddenly don't seem so sure-footed. And I was thinking a lot about this when I was thinking about the Online Safety Act. So a lot of the conversation around the Online Safety Act was kind of wild. Some of you might remember Peter Kyle, who is the technology minister, Secretary of State for Business and Trade. Sort of technology kind of comes under his brief, saying that if you want to overturn the Online Safety Act, you are on the side of predators. It is simple as that. And this causing a huge amount of uproar, and understandably, right? I think lots of people who had thoughts about the Online Safety Act had really sensible criticisms of it, and still do. One of my thoughts, which I will come on to, one of my main criticisms is that regardless of what your intention is with it, regardless of whether it is a morally correct thing to do. I'm unsure that the technology is there to be able to put these bans in place, put age verification in place in a way that I don't think has risks. However, I think at least part of it is that maybe Kyle and certainly a lot of other people who are coming to this topic from that from having existed in a world before the sort of libertarian utopia of the internet, for want of a better word, the idea of adding like an age gate to adult content is completely logical, right? And I sort of think they're right on that. And if you go back 20, 30 years, um, somewhere between those, right, where the internet is much less of a thing and someone wants to access adult material, they have to go to a shop to buy it and they have to show their ID to do so, right? And you have to be a grown up to purchase that material. And if you are approaching it from that thing of like the internet and adult material websites, we'll say for monetization reasons, are kind of the online version of that, then the mental model of that just applies straight over, right? All of this additional stuff about of kind of like slippery slopes of how does it affect our ability to engage with the internet kind of doesn't apply in quite the same way. And I think if we really want to be able to understand this topic, we really have to be able to understand that like there is a really good point there. I think it is entirely consistent with the way we police a lot of offline stuff for us to, in theory at least, want that to be a thing, right? Want to have alcohol websites where you have to be 18 to go on them, want to have adult websites where you have to have verified your age. Whether that's possible to do is another question, but at least in principle, it is a thing which makes sense. Immigrant site. And then we have the other side of things, which really comes from this digital native mindset, which I think folks like Peter Kyle, other kind of legislators, and also other people who are just extremely supportive of this, that really want to do something about, particularly about young people and the internet, but also kind of what social media hath wrought, is that they don't quite understand that there actually are big differences between showing your ID to a single person who is working in a shop and uploading a photo of your ID to a third party company who, yeah, probably at the moment they've given really good assurances about data protection, etc., but who, I think we're right not to trust, right? And the sense of distrust towards them is linked to the sense of distrust which is guiding bills like the online safety bill or Australia's ban. And I think the fundamental criticism of any of these rules, any of these laws, which it's going to be really hard to work ourselves around, is that flaw of like, I don't know if there's a way to implement age verification on the internet which doesn't open up just a huge amounts of danger, not only for just the sort of broad data protection factor, but also like, do you suddenly expose people with political or economic power to like blackmail, right? Do you open up kind of all of these ways to suddenly extort people for lots of money if someone hacks into the age verification system? Because even if they've not used a VPN, which is a whole other thing where they might have suddenly someone's used a free VPN and they've got all of their history tracked, but at the very least, someone is on the like, I want to access adult material list. Suddenly, like the big data aspect of all of this does make it very different to going into a shop and showing your ID. However, the ultimate kind of challenge this reveals for us as a world at the moment is I think it shows us the extent to which it is always easier in politics and in lawmaking to not do a thing than it is to do a thing. Doing nothing here kind of isn't a neutral option, which isn't sort of necessarily apologia for these particular rules, but we exist in a world currently where social media has a lot of power. Social media companies have a lot of power over our politics, over the adolescence of young people, over so many different aspects of our lives. And not doing something is unfortunately kind of a tacit either acceptance, at least, if not encouragement, of that world. And I do find it really interesting sometimes where people who are like dyed in the wool socialists who would like to see more regulation of various other aspects of our lives don't want it here. And I think part of that is that digital native stuff. It seems like it's breaking sort of some fundamental right for there to be any kind of oversight of the internet. My worry is that by doing nothing, we find ourselves in a place where we are just letting Elon Musk do his thing. We are letting Mark Zuckerberg do his thing. And one of the things I found interesting about the Australia law is that they've been quite open about the idea that it might not work. And that's kind of really grabbed me as something that all lawmaking could benefit from. They've said both that if young people move from the particular platforms that have been banned from making accounts for them, they will just update the law to include whatever the new platform is that's attracted a lot of young people, which I think is interesting, not only from a point of view of like rolling it out and just having a sort of common sense approach, but also you are then instantly disincentivizing other platforms from trying to become that platform. But they've also been quite open about saying like, this is that like young people are going to get around this. Like some proportion of young people are going to get around this law. In the same way that young people sometimes are able to buy alcohol, or people are sometimes able to buy drugs. But that having the kind of principle of the law gives you a baseline of just sort of going broadly, this thing is bad. We think you should be above 16 to access social media. But also if you are capturing half the people, hey, you've done a thing. And whether you agree with this particular law or not, or if you have a different approach, I do think there's been something interesting to me reading about that, of like an approach to governance where you go, do you know what, this thing might not be perfect. Let's give it a shot anyway if we think the principle is there. But anyway, this is a topic that, as I've said a few times throughout this, I'm not entirely in the 70% that like strongly or somewhat support this. I don't know exactly what the answer is. I am really interested to see what happens in Australia, because I think what we have is a big natural experiment for us all to watch. And thank you very much for watching this Tom Nicholas 2 clip. This is something we're trying out lately. We're calling these dead streams. They're sort of doing the equivalent of what we used to do with some live stream clips. Apart from I'm not live streaming at the moment because I have a baby to look after, and past about 3 p.m. I'm incredibly tired. And we also thought we could maybe punch them up a little bit if we do it this way. So let me know what you think of these. Let me know what you would like us to do more of, like us to do less of. And if you would like to support what we do in both these videos and the main channel stuff, you can go to patreon.com/Tom Nicholas and you can help us to do that. See you in the next one.